Hello. Welcome to episode 56 of Right Where You're Sitting Now, the podcast for the website sittingnow.co.uk. Oh man, what a week. Things suddenly got very busy for me. So this episode's about 2 days late, but I apologise for that. We are trying to stay on schedule, but at least we're still weekly, so that's a good thing. As you're probably noticing, I am once again on my own in the intro. That's because this is actually an older episode. This is an episode... we recorded this 2 episodes back, I think it was. 2 episodes back, we did an interview with Allen H Greenfield, I should say. We did a really long interview with him, and there's a lot of gold in there. And we only included the first part of that interview. And then we got the opportunity to have Peter Gray on the show. So we thought, well, we should probably whack him in there because his book's out at the moment. And so, yeah, this is basically part 2 of that Allen Greenfield episode. He's very courteously and very patiently waited for us to post this, and we appreciate him very much for that. And we hope to have him come on to some other things that we're doing soon. So that's exciting stuff if you're a fan of Mr. Greenfield, and you should be really, because he's a very nice man and very knowledgeable, and we really like him a lot. Bit of house duty, I suppose. So yeah, come and check us out on Sitting Now. Come and check us out on Instagram, username Sitting Now. I'm really rubbish at posting there, but I have a plan of stuff I'm going to start posting. I've been looking at how all the other guys do it, and I think I'm getting an idea. You can always follow me personally on Instagram as well, which is at Ken Eakins, which is EAKINS. And also subscribe to us on the podcast platforms like iTunes and Spotify. And I don't know, do they do reviews still? Reviews used to count. I don't know if they do anymore. I'm an old man at this stuff these days. So I don't know. Subscribe and do all that business and share us around. And we've got a lot of really, really cool and interesting stuff coming, especially on our YouTube channel. Also, search for Sitting Now, one word, and you will find our YouTube channel where we upload, I guess, video versions of these interviews, but we're also we have a bit of a backlog of stuff on there. We did some event coverage for Scarlet Imprint, which is Peter Gray from the last show's company. He did a couple of events in Brighton, our hometown, and we recorded and put out all the talks from those shows, or at least most of them. But yeah, so we've got a lot of stuff already up there, and we've got some stuff which I've already started shooting, so that's exciting. So we're on our way in terms of video content. So yeah, this week we, as I said earlier, we got back together with Allen Greenfield. Well, we didn't. We returned to our original get together with Allen Greenfield. But it's fun times had by all. It's a bit of a shorter interview than usual. I think it comes in at about 55 minutes. We tend to go a bit longer than that, but it's you're getting some extra Greenfield, so that's always good. And I will speak to you after the interview.
You were wanting to say that you wanted to step away from the OTO topic, and I wondered if I could ask you a little question about the Secret Cipher, because I got your book in the 90s and was really fired up by it. I made myself a little dictionary, is that the right word? Like a numerology dictionary of various correlations that I was finding through the cipher. And I'm just curious as to how someone using the cipher, in your opinion, is able to determine between sort of meaningful correlations and the law of averages of if you chuck enough words in, they will come up with certain values. I would have lists of words, a list under, say, number 45, a list of words, and I'd be able to see connections between certain words and other words. It would perhaps be a bit more oblique. And I'm curious as to what you feel is the way for determining whether you've made a valid connection or whether you're just selecting things that you can sort of mash together.
First,
do you know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the first things that I wrestled with. There being an infinite number of numbers, theoretically, and a near infinite number of letter combinations, you can get it to say anything. As one of my friends, the late Jim Mosley, put it in his magazine Saucer Smear, he said, oh, well, you can make it say, Barney is a purple dinosaur, and using the, yes, you can force it, just like any kind of Kabbalah, including Hebrew and Greek Kabbalah going back to antiquity. But if you have some good working knowledge of probability theory, and also the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I would, for my own satisfaction, because I assumed that people would pick this up and do things with it, like if I'm just pulling this out of my ear. How's that? Who was that to? My left ear at that. But you come up with the name. The alien told me he was Fitzik from the planet Boo-Woo. And you say, how do you spell that? B-O-O-W-O, which raises the question in context, of course, did he spell it for you? How did Al Bender know that it was pronounced K, but it was spelled K-Z-I-K? Did the Men in Black tell him that? You see those things and you can make a lot out of it, whatever. I assumed that people would do what you did, but you're the first person I've talked to who said, I've actually worked with the cipher, until 2 years ago when the first excellent series on documentary on field research on all of these things, Hellier, was kind enough to credit my work. And since then, I hear from all kinds of people that are working with it in a variety of ways, even very far afield of it from anywhere that I've ever gone. But if there is a couple of things that you can do. First, there is the difficult to pin down sense of, does this fit or does it not fit? Because there's a signal to noise ratio. And if you come up with a name like Orthon, and it has the same value as Jesus, and you have that whole Yamsky affair, which was shortly after George Adamski died. Actually, he's buried at the Arlington National Cemetery because he was in World War I, and my friend Jim Mosley informed me that he was also an exceedingly anti-Semitic person, which may be, but that doesn't invalidate the interesting nature of the word, because basically, if you buy the Yamsky story, he rose from the dead. Only he picked your country to rise instead of his native country, Poland, or his adopted country, the United States. And there's a whole range of things there. It's in the book. If it fits well beyond chance expectation, you give it a probability above chance. If it just seems like noise, then you consider it part of the noise in the signal to noise ratio. If the ratio is viable, if it makes sense, if it's more than chance would allow on a consistent basis, then you say there's probably something to this. You have to develop a feel for it. And as I said, I think two things are helpful. One is having a good general knowledge of the subject matter of both occultism and specifically the whole Crowleyan Class A document thing, which, you can take that literally or metaphorically, or think that it's communication not unlike other trance channeling things before and since. The OHASPI, is that what it's called? Channeled at about the same time as Liberal, and the Urania book, which was also channeled at about the same time. That makes sense to me, and I'll buy into that to the extent that I think channeling is tuning into something of significance. But I try to apply the principles of people like Dean Redden of looking at averages and various reports and probability theory and seeing if there is a valid pattern. And I wouldn't say there is proof that it's not random, but there is strong evidence that it's not random, which is precisely the same as the evidence for telepathy and remote viewing and near-death experiences and a bunch of other things that are barely fringe science, but have some very, very serious people with good academic credentials that follow it. Is that a fair answer to your?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So one thing, you were talking about Hellier earlier on, and obviously that's become a bit of a, a thing. Yeah. Yeah. I watched both series and had some questions about their use of synchronicity, and I don't know, maybe you could throw some insight on this. It seemed that there were some genuine synchronicities going on there, but there also seemed to be do you feel that perhaps they maybe got wrapped up in finding synchronicities that were, like we were discussing earlier, they were below the line of probable synchronicities, if you know what I mean? There did seem to be a fair amount of I'm trying to think of the right word, like confirmation bias, I suppose, sometimes in what they were doing. But generally, I felt it was a good investigation. But I don't know I guess it's maybe in the same way. It's the same question as Ulysses. It's how do you stop yourself, I guess, from seeing everything as a synchronicity, and sort of getting too wrapped up in it's a bit like Kabbalah, isn't it? You have to kind of go mad almost to to really understand it. But how do you kind of stop that from happening and kind of potentially devaluing the actual synchronicities that are occurring around you, kind of thing? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it. There's a part of me that is inclined to think that synchronicities, as Jung defined it, are much more common and usually unnoticed than is generally thought, even by people who understand the notion altogether. That's A. B, one of the things I really liked about Hellier is these are a group of relatively young people with a clean slate. C or 3, which am I doing? Numbers or letters? It doesn't matter. It's the third in line, which the letter C is third, unless you're doing the cipher, in which case W is third in line. But that's a whole different subject, and we've already covered it. And you can read the books if you haven't, and that will help me because I have a wonderful publisher. I have two wonderful publishers now that actually pay royalties and don't run off with the church funds, as it were. I've actually had that happen. When you're almost famous, you get screwed over quite a bit, and it happens, and you just have to go with the flow if you're in a somewhat marginalized area, which is certainly the case with the occult, with UFOs, with cryptid research, with even paranormal research. It has some academic standing in certain institutions, and there are professional people that are involved, but it's still marginal. And after a very, very long time, from the birth of the SPR through Dr. Ryan's experiments, through the very, very convincing work that the late Ian Stevenson did at the University of Virginia on reincarnation cases among children, not hypnosis cases, which is a whole different ballgame. Anyway, getting back to Hellier as such, these are fresh people. They've been ghost hunters since they were teenagers. For the last 20 years, I believe Dana Newkirk mentioned. And not involved in any of these other things. The very freshness of the way they documented their field research, as opposed to the ghost hunter type television standard, like I said, the two plumbers with a temperature gauge and go into an allegedly haunted house, and they hear a rat in the wall and they go, that's really not kosher. And they are, because I've done a lot of field investigations, and even the blind alleys that they get, they show. And that is precisely what a real field investigation is like. Sometimes the magic works, sometimes it doesn't.
It's very much like magical operation, isn't it? It's like one of the good things you could say about Crowley is that he catalogued his failures as much as his successes, I suppose. And that's kind of one of the reasons I think I find Crowley endearing anyway. I find that, so what you're saying is kind of like the same thing in a way. They're kind of showing the failures as well as the successes, I guess.
Exactly. I pointed out some things that seemed like failures but weren't, because the magical aspect is relatively new to them. So I pointed out that in that, first of all, I have a long anecdote that I'm not going to share tonight, but if you ever invite me back, I will, although I won't use names. Invocations of Pan, there's a reason that panic comes from Pan. It's not something you want to invoke in a mine shaft that may be full of bears in the back who get hungry or disturbed. But aside from that, you get what you ask for. And they had been searching for Indrid Cold. They do this sort of witchy magical circle, which was okay, but they're asking for Pan to appear in an abandoned mine shaft where they had previously been looking for goblins. Or something. I mean, that term was, not in the original reports that they were following, but it did fit the description and the much earlier case. And in truth, that whole area is a bonanza for people like that. So they did this ritual. Actually, Dana Newkirk conducted it, and they all participated in it. And they didn't get Pan, but they got Cold. And I said, well, you've been asking for Indrid Cold for months. and you get cold when you invoke Pan. Coincidence? Possibly, but the temperature underground, I've done my share of spelunking, is constant. There aren't any warm and cold periods. So I would call it a success that they thought was of limited success. But as I pointed out to them, I believe on the program, but certainly offline, as it were, that the whole approach that they take of following where the synchronicities lead, right or wrong about a specific one, is an initiation itself. You don't need to do a formal ritual. I mean, you can. There's nothing wrong with it. But the entire process seems to be their initiation into the world of the unknown beyond ghost hunting or curiosity seeking or the kind of stuff you see in these television programs that allegedly are about one or another of these subjects, always neatly packaged in ye old extraterrestrial hypothesis, which I've always found puzzling. I mean, no UFO has ever been seen coming from outer space. They're seen either just above the Earth or on the Earth. But from day one, it was either natural phenomena or it was beings from other planets. Now, from a sociological perspective, why were those the only two possibilities that were put forth? I don't know. When I was a small child, which I was born after the war, but my parents liked to go to Miami Beach every July. And I was wading in the water, in the ocean, and there were other kids wading in the ocean. And I see the contrail of a jet, which was a new thing at that time. And so I thought, oh, that's a contrail of a jet, or whatever kid talk the equivalent of that is. In other words, I knew it was something of this earth. But I heard another kid further down the beach saying, there goes a soul ascending into heaven. And I don't know whether there's a heaven, and I am not absolutely sure whether there's a soul, but I don't think they leave an exhaust trail. So, you know, it's sort of the same thing. Your conclusions have something to do with, well, post-war, high tech is coming into fashion. They must be from Mars. And when Mars turned out to be, if it was ever inhabited, it was inhabited millions of years ago, and we may be the Martians, which would kind of make Darwin need to revise his theories. But he's in Westminster Cathedral, all decomposing like a good evolutionist should. So that's a steal from a line about Beethoven. What's he doing now? I know what he was doing. What's he doing? He's decomposing.
So, actually, I'm going to pinch one of Ulysses's questions here. Is what do you feel currently is the kind of the cutting edge of kind of occult studies? Like, if we're in a kind of, you know, internet world now, should there be, you know, more advanced methods of occult study, or do you think the old way is still the best way? Or, you know, what's your take on kind of modern occultism, I guess?
It's become too popular for people who really have no scientific training to try to assess the veracity or lack thereof in all of these areas. Now, there have been some efforts to guide it, but the best I can say is the best days of the SPR were a long time ago, and they did very thorough research by very reputable people. Now it's sort of like the Theosophical Society. I went to one or two of their meetings because somebody was speaking that I knew, and it's really kind of sad. Their charter here was issued, I think, in 1910, but it's, you know, a little group of old people talking about sort of thing that you can get in the Unitarian Church, which is to say, not much of anything. It's time for a new generation to pick it up and see it differently, because as the late Jean Duplantier said, it's like a long walk down an endless tube. Laboratory experiments rely on something that just isn't there, which is repeatability, because people get exhausted. I worked for 5 years for the Psychic Friends Network. I did not get $3.99 a talk minute. I got 25 cents, and when they upped me to Master Psychic, whatever that is, I got 35 cents a talk minute, which was a meager salary, but I could do it from home, and that's home is where the heart is. It's also where the bathroom is, which is also important. But people want you to be able to do really, really major things on cue. And believe me, I did the graveyard shift, the night shift, the late night shift. Pretty much what I'm doing right at the moment, even though you've got the sun shining. Oh, I'm sorry, that's in England. The sun doesn't shine.
The sun for decades.
And I'm hearing the Beatles in my head, sitting in the English garden, waiting for the sun to come. Okay, that's my Beatles moment.
So can I ask then? Do you think, and it's a sort of strange word to use, I guess. Do you think progress is being made in the occult / UFO kind of world in terms of decoding what's going on? And do you think we're actually getting anywhere? Yeah, what's your take?
I'm not sure that we can get to an ultimate answer because, as I said, we're not hardwired for what I suspect strongly is going on. But I think we can get a lot closer to the, if there's such a thing exists, absolute truth than we are now. And we're certainly closer post Keel and Valet and post Hellier. I think we're moving in the right direction. There are some things in academic parapsychology that are a lot better. Much of it done by the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which was founded by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who walked famously on the moon. But Dean Radin seems to be the mover and shaker of that, and his books do things like taking all the studies that have been reported and allowing for the fact that some people tend to not record, quote, failures, which in a laboratory setting, there's no such thing. I mean, there are positive and negative results, but he made an effort to assess from the Rhine period to the quite recently, 21st century, and doing a, what do they call that in academia? A cross, somebody help me here, there's a term for it. a study that looks at the probability of it being greater than chance in a study of all the studies.
Meta-analysis?
Yeah, meta-analysis. And Radin did that. Radin, I've never met him, although he was at a convention that I've spoken at, but these things happen. And if you do a meta-analysis, the results are very convincing that at a minimum, the big 4 or 5 or 6 overwhelmingly are likely to exist. And if they do, it opens up a whole world of things. Now, individual studies have been done for a very long time. Some anecdotal, some of them laboratory, some of them field studies. But a meta-study is going to really show you whether, the lucky hit is just a lucky hit or whether it's part of a bigger whole. So that's progress from the academic point of view. And by God, Hellier is a big step over UFO hunters, ghost hunters, and all kinds of hunters. So, in magic, the problem is you have these dogmatic, hierarchical organizations. They tend to be so dogmatic that they basically are a church. And that's fine. A belief system is okay by me as long as it's not one that's going to blame the Jews for COVID. That's my personal interest, but it's not a way to do scientific research. I had a long conversation when I stood in very well in the OTO, not to get back into that, but just one anecdote. I spent a long evening with Dave Scriven, the U.S. Grand Master, at his home, trying to tell him, why don't we establish some of the same protocols they use in parapsychology to assess whether these initiations do anything positive for the people who are initiated. And I gave this whole rap about parapsychology and about how you test for that, and going in questionnaire and a coming out questionnaire, and he listened politely, and I talked like I'm doing on this show over and over and at great length, and that was the end of it. I mean, he didn't say, "Oh, that's stupid," or "Oh, that's going to cause you a Grand Lodge office." That's the difference between him and his boss. But as far as I'm aware, for the 20 years I was there and the 10 years after I had said that to him, nothing has been done to put formal initiations on a scientific basis because they're not scientific. They're encounters. I alternately think of the Gnostic Mass as a come-on for the organization or as a mystery play, and now they think of it as a religious ceremony. And I follow the most liberal form of Judaism, which is not real heavy on dogma, or actually there are no dogmas. So as it became more of a religion, I became less involved emotionally in what was dogmatic. And the same applies to the Golden Dawn, or the so-called Golden Dawn, the so-called AA, or AAs actually, and so-called OTOs. I mean, this notion of lineal succession is of academic interest, but it doesn't carry with it any kind of egregore. I mean, it's just, it's a begots from, and Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot a lot. But that's not in any sense scientific. It may be true, or it may be anecdotal, or it may be, a folk tale told and embellished over time, but it's not science.
I wonder if Ken, I'm not giving you any space here. I wonder if I can jump in and ask another question then, because it's kind of maybe has a bit more of a scientific element to it. Certainly, the areas of the Typhonian sort of traditions which really embraced contact with something other. And had very sort of creative methods of going about it. And then Michael Bertiaux's system, which I'm aware that you're familiar with, and has a scientific element to its approach. I wonder if you would share a bit of your insights on that kind of thing. Because I think that's also, to anyone who is from an OTO kind of background, Michael Bertiaux's stuff is extremely foreign.
Yeah, but not exactly, because Bill Breeze was originally consecrated, empowered, as I would say, by Jack Hogg, a mutual friend. And Jack Hogg was a direct student of Michael Bertiaux. And I have often said that of all of the people involved in the magical world that I have met, I have learned more from Michael Bertiaux personally and in terms of his monastery, the Seven.
There's a theory in metacomputers I remember when I was a boy and being utterly baffled by them. So yeah, I'd love a bit more of an inside understanding of what was going on with Bertiaux's stuff.
It's I think Grant Morrison in his I'm not going to call it a comic book, The Invisibles issue, that graphic novel. Yes, that's the term for comic books when adults read them. It's more succinct and on target about what Bertiaux is trying to convey to a public that, generally speaking, doesn't have a clue about what he's talking about, than anything else that I can just sort of throw away. There are a few analytical things on Bertiaux's work because it's a little of this, a little of that. It's exceedingly eclectic. And I used to say what he could use is a good editor and an index in his books. But they were all designed, the 4-year course, the 3-year course, and then essentially the Voodoo Gnostic workbook is the 4th year of the Monastery of the Seven Rays, at least as I look at it. It was designed as a sort of like AIMWorks back in the days when people used hard copy mail. He would mail out one lesson, I don't know, a month, a week, whatever. All I know is they ran a full-page ad every issue of Fate magazine. So I don't know how widely it was dispersed, but it probably was much more understandable to the people that were recipients, however many there were, to see it in a series of short lessons going on for a period of years. It's a 3-year course meant to be done in 3 years. The 4th year is meant to be a year. It took me a year to read the book. And I'm a, medium reader, and I read voluminously. Is that a word? Sure it is.
Yeah.
But is it the word that I meant to use? Tune in tomorrow. Well, anyway, I think that it was easier to access in that form than in the collected courses. And my advice to anyone who wants to understand where Bertiaux is coming from is to read through it cover to cover and then go back and read the parts that seem to resonate with you. Dog ear pages, or put bookmarks in if you're particular. And those parts will sing to you and the rest of it will fall into place. It's not orderly, but it is as close to correct as anybody that I have ever met. And he's a very powerful magician, as was Grant, by the way.
Yeah.
Another thing I begged Scriven to do, I said, look, Grant is getting on in years. This is, 10, 12 years ago. No, more than that. Someone from the, I didn't say corporate, but I thought it, OTO, ought to interview him, not as a rival, but as a person who personally knew Aleister Crowley when he was young, and when Grant was young. And there are not a lot of people left that do. Well, it never happened as far as I'm aware. So angrily, Thor burned Boleskine down to punish them. And I had nothing to do with it. I was out with it.
Well, I think we'll probably have to put a bookmark in it, but I'm going to have to ask you to come back on the show very soon, if that's okay, Alan, because we've only really covered a fraction of the stuff that we could possibly talk about. But it's been amazing. It's been amazing having you on, and if you're game for it, we'd be up for having you back on really soon. If you're available. But is there any projects you have coming up that you want to tell our listeners about? Any books coming out, or any any way you'd like to send our listeners to find your latest output?
If you haven't read the Complete Secret Cipher, the Ufonauts, you're not going to understand where I'm coming from. Never mind Bertiaux is coming from. So, I believe, I don't have anything to do with the publishing end of things. I don't think I even have a copy of it. Yeah, I do, somewhere. I get synchronicities whenever I read anything by Philip K. Dick. Turn to the TV and there's, a Man in the High Castle program coming on. I didn't know anything about. It's like that. So that book has become part of the mythos, if you want to call it that, in the Campbell sense. Other books, some of my books are out of print, and you can get them from Abe Books or other obscure dealers, which, by the way, I don't get any royalties on, for outrageously high prices.
Yeah, I was trying to buy Liber 30, your version. You edited Liber 31, didn't you? Fratera.
Yep.
Yeah. And
the only authorized edition, authorized by Akkad's son. Yeah,
and he's. I tried picking up a copy, but it's $300 on ABE Books, so I'm having to save up for that, I think. But yeah, I really badly want to read that, but like I said, I just can't get hold of it. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, and I must say that was during my studious OTO period where I was very into it. So the footnotes that I did are unique to that version. I mean, you can, pull down Liber 31 online. By the way, it's interesting to me that when the Hellier people, that actual interview went on for like 4 hours. If you watch the blinking clock, which I wasn't even aware of until I, saw the program or looked back after the interview. I was too busy leaning back into the chair looking like Brando playing The Godfather. Wow. The balloons are really important. I have a book out that is not doing as well, and I think it's the title, although the other my other publisher thinks that it's not. It's called God Never Does the Same Thing Twice. And I assure you, it's not a religious book. It's a gonzo book and sort of my musings on reality.
Oh,
and
good.
It's worth a read. And
let's check it out.
Yeah, that's available from Amazon UK if you have access to that, or all the usual online booksellers. I believe have it. Just don't buy it from one of the rare book people because they'll give you a used copy for $150 or something. But I mean, it's current or reasonably current. And let's see, I have another book coming out from Blue Star Press, which played a significant role in Hellier in my one moment of psychic prophecy. I said, you're not really appreciating the balloon thing. It's going to put a barrier in your path. And I swear to Jesus and Buddha, I did not get in a jet, fly to wherever they were, Kentucky, and throw a balloon at the roots of a fallen tree and put it across the road. But a couple hours after they were had interviewed me, they said, why did he keep talking about that balloon, that happy birthday balloon? Wait a minute. There's a barrier in our path. Look, there's a blue balloon. I don't even know if they know even now that my other publisher is Blue Star Publishing. I mean, it's just too much. We were talking about the serious mystery and all. That's a synchronicity. That doesn't require any analysis. And it made me feel a little weird when I heard about it. I thought, well, I didn't mean to, harp on it. I just thought that they were underappreciating it, but not anymore. Not anymore.
So
let's see, what else?
You wrote a book called The Hermetic Brotherhood of Light as well, I think, didn't you? Is that an older book, or because it keeps popping up in my Amazon?
That's an older book.
Yeah.
But it was published in, this satanic guy in Sweden or somewhere. You'd have to look on my Wikipedia page. I don't even remember the name of the publisher. But if it's still in print, it's not in print on this side of the pond. So you may be able to find it for a reason. I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. It's the better of the two books that came out almost simultaneously. I worked with the guys who did, what was it called? The Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. Yeah. And I did something that most field investigators don't do. I knew that a little town in North Georgia, which was settled mostly by Scotsmen or Scots. What is the correct, politically correct way of putting that now? You notice, because in most towns in the little towns in the deep South, there is a Baptist church and a Pentecostalist church, and maybe a Catholic church. But up there, and a Methodist church, I'm sorry. Forgive me, John Wesley. I'm referring to John Wesley Hardin, the gunslinger, but I'm just kidding. Up there, it's all the Presbyterian churches everywhere, because that part of South Carolina, crossing over into Georgia, was pioneered late, like in the 1880s and 1890s, by Scottish people. So even their descendants are conservative, socially conservative people. And I knew if I was going to get any information about the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light from folks that were descended directly from Peter Davidson, the frontal chief, for a very long time, starting in Scotland and ending up in Cleveland, Georgia, actually in a little town next to Cleveland, Georgia, that doesn't exist anymore. But the post office left, so the town closed down. It's just the way It's just the way the state of Georgia is structured. But I went in ecclesiastical garb with a friend who was reliable and not given to saying really weird things, and I got a direct descendant who, they all know that story. Everybody in that town knows about Peter Davidson. And because you don't get a lot of famous people in Cleveland, Georgia. I mean, ever heard of it? I only knew the name, it's even, at least they call it Cleveland, not Cleveland, because Cairo, Georgia is pronounced Cairo. Cairo, Georgia. I mean, there's just, and Vienna, Georgia is Vienna. It's a legacy of the Confederacy, I'm sure. Laugh if you will. I grew up in that in that toxic environment.
Yeah.
But she didn't want to meet at her home, and we apparently had the right Southern charm approach. I spent the first 10 years of my life in Augusta, Georgia, and I dropped into a passable version of Augusta Ease, mentioned some spiritual stuff, and she told me that one of the investigators, not necessarily, I don't remember who it was, but it was a well-known investigator. She was a third grade teacher, and this guy walked into her classroom asking about the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light and Peter Davidson, and she said, after that, I've been reluctant to meet with anybody. And sure enough, the whole Davidson clan, apparently on her say-so, really told me and gave me materials going back to Davidson that they would not have shared with anyone else, including the paterfamilias. Is that the Latin? Yeah. The head of the clan, literally clan, the Davidson clan society, they have Highland games, and all these Scots groups do that. They not only shared it, but the Clan Davidson Society's newsletter gave my contact information, said I was working on material on Peter Davidson. So, I got a lot of recognition. And finally, another family member, I asked tentatively, I said, do I have the permission of the family? Because who else am I going to ask? Because Davidson, I went to his grave, he wasn't moving around or anything. He was decomposing too. So he had that in common with Darwin and Beethoven, and a few other people, I guess. And I got permission to carry on the work of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. And not exclusively. I mean, other people, like all of these things, there's no lineage that is pure or anything. But I do my share of that because I consider it to be seminal. It comes originally from P.B. Randolph. By the way, I do have a new little monograph. I won't call it a book, on P.B. Randolph's secret teachings, which has some of the same material that's in the back of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light book. So if you can't get that, you definitely can get the P.B. Randolph thing. So from the usual booksellers, and I don't know what it's going for, but it might be useful to you because 50 years before Crowley, this was what was being taught about sexual magic by Randolph, and then by Davidson and Burgoyne, who had a falling out, by the way. Burgoyne left their utopian group in North Georgia and went to California and wrote the first volume of The Light of Egypt, a fairly famous book of that period. And then after he died, he wrote the second volume. I'm not kidding. It was trans-channeled, and it has his name on the cover. I would give a little less credence to Volume 2 than to Volume 1. Burgoyne was a bit of a Edward Kelly to Dr. D sort in that relationship. So let me see. Do I have anything else? Yes, there's the book that was published and then disappeared because the publisher was my agent for that book. It was called The Roots of Modern Magic. I don't even own a copy. 1700 to 2000. It's a little dated now for obvious reasons, but I think it is probably the best historical work that I've ever done. But it was only available for a short period of time because the publisher, known as the Red Bishop, because I think he was a member of the Workers' World Party or whatever, he absconded with his wife's life savings. The church funds from his New York Gnostic, whatever it was, and has disappeared. And it's still available, but it's no longer my book. I told Amazon, hey, are you still sending the checks to that address in New Jersey? Because Dustin has disappeared completely. I don't know if he was in trouble with the mob or his one of the quaint little groups of communists out there in the universe, or whether he had taken out a loan, but he basically stole the church funds, stole his wife's funds, and basically stole mine, because I said, if you're sending royalty checks to him, I don't know where he is, and you don't know, so why don't you send them to me? And they said, we can pull the book, but we can't transfer the name because of Bezos on high. So I really don't know. So there is a new edition of that coming out with new material in it. I probably will do an introduction that kind of updates it for the last 20 years. And that's in the works from Blue Star Press.
Excellent.
But Complete Secret Cipher is the going thing right now mainly because of Hellier. I mean, so, and I think Hellier is the coming trend among serious people who really want to explore things in an honest way, even when they don't work out in the way that they expect it, which is, that's commendable.
Magic.
Yes, that's magic. Yeah. Oh, well, Alan, thanks so much for coming on. Like I said, we'll have you back on sooner rather than later. Because we've still got so much to cover with you, which is always good. But yeah, thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon, I hope.
We'll be delighted to come back. This is a very literate show, which is I can't say that because they won't invite me back. I can plug my books, but I get questions like, so what are UFOs? Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Greenfield.
And we're back. As always, Mr. Greenfield delivers. Less OTO-centric this time, which is good. But we really didn't actually hit on one of the major things I wanted to talk to him about. So it's quite likely that we'll have him back on again sooner rather than later. I want to talk to him about Men in Black. I want to talk to him about some more paranormal stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff I want to talk to Mr. Greenfield about. And if you want to us to ask him any particular questions, or in general, if you want us to ask our guests questions, I need to figure out a way of communicating with you guys. I'm thinking of Discord, or I'm possibly thinking of we have a Facebook group, but it's a very strange group. I don't quite know how it works. I think I might have set up the wrong. You have to set it up in this weird way, and I think I might have set it up wrong. So I've never had any luck communicating with people that way. So you can always email me, ken@sittingnow.co.uk, if you've got any ideas of ways you'd like us to communicate. But yeah, we're looking into it all. We're all busy behind the scenes, so doing stuff to improve that experience. But like I said earlier, check us out on Instagram @sittingnow. Check us out on YouTube, Sitting Now. And if you want to, you can find Ulysses Black's on there somewhere. I think he's at Ulysses Black, and I'm at Ken Eakins. It's Eakins. People always get that wrong. But yeah, I'm really enjoying being back in the podcasting saddle again. We've got a really good interview lined up for next week. I'm not going to jinx it by telling you who it is yet. We haven't quite got our kind of backlog schedule in place yet where I can start sort of bragging about the guests we have in place yet, but we're working on it. We've got a few booked, actually. They're all pretty cool. We're trying to kind of not just do occult episodes, so we're going to be looking at some other stuff as well. I know we've been a bit occult heavy for the last few episodes. We're planning to, we're not going to abandon the occult at all. In fact, we've got a few occult guests booked as well. But we are interested in other topics, and always have been on this show. So variety is the spice of life, and we're going to continue that. One thing I should have mentioned earlier as well is you'll notice the audio quality was pretty wonky on the Allen Greenfield episodes. It's because we didn't have the tech we now have in place. We have much more professional recording equipment now, which is really nice, actually. And we're just waiting for the internet to go in at my studio so that we can start doing some video versions of this podcast, which is I'm really looking forward to. I think that's going to be really good fun. But anyway, I'm kind of waffling. I always waffle, don't I, on these podcasts? But anyway, we'll see you next week with another episode of Right Where You're Sitting Now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.